I'm Victoria Forth. I'm the Programme Manager for the iLESLA programme. This is just a short introduction to the financial aspects of undertaking a PhD, DPhil or Masters. I'm going to share these and all the other slides after the workshop, by the way, just to reassure you. If you do miss anything, or if you've missed anything of any of the previous presentations, you will get the information. We'll have a few questions right at the end. But if there's anything that's really not clear as I go along and you just need a bit of clarification, do let me know. So the two main things I'm going to touch on really here are looking at what are the costs and how can you meet the costs of doing a degree. So I'm just a quick exploration of those topics. So there are three main things that we are all going to need that we all need for life. In terms of doing a degree, obviously you're going to need to pay the fees, you're going to need living costs, and you're going to need, in the sciences, research-related expenses. And these three categories tend to be the three things that are covered when you get a grant or funding from a funding body. So I've included here, I don't expect you to be able to read this, but when you get the slides later, you can have a little look at it. This is a table of the estimated costs of living in Oxford, which is one of the more expensive cities. It's broken down into kind of the lower range and the upper range. Suffice to say, all these different categories add up to getting on for £25,000 a year in the upper range, or around about 17,000 in the lower range. So that's like the minimum they expect you to need. And this is just for the living costs part. This isn't for your fees or for your research costs. So it's worth having these ballpark figures in mind when you're thinking about, am I going to commit to this new path in my life? And of course, if you have childcare costs, these figures are going to be quite a bit more. So if you're an international student, there are even additional costs to this. You will probably have to pay the immigration health surcharge, which is you have to pay for the whole of the course up front, which is a stinger. So it's about £800 a year, I think, £776 per year. So if you have a 4-year degree course, your institution will probably add 6 months onto the end of that, but you only can pay whole years, that you can't pay half a year. So you'll end up having to pay 5 years of that charge up front. So that's quite significant. And then, of course, you will have to think about visa costs, travel and relocation. All of that will depend on your individual circumstances. There is a link here at the bottom, which is the gov.uk guide to everything you need to consider, and that's quite, it's useful because it has links through to the actual pages where you can start to apply for the various things. On the Oxford website, there's a very useful visa office website, but I appreciate that's not necessarily relevant to everybody, so I've stuck with the gov.uk link. And then the research costs. These again will vary quite a lot depending on what type of research you're doing. So if you've got a largely modelling based qualification, it may just be the cost of a good computer, or you may have lab work or field work, and both of those, the sky's the limit really with how much you might end up spending. I think the important thing to think about is, what is the important thing to think about? Not to choose a project that is way beyond what's feasible. So you need to discuss things with your supervisor. Supervisors very often have pots of money, grants they're called, that might fund things like field work or sampling, sequencing, lab costs. Fieldwork costs, that sort of thing. And very often you can apply for grants. In Oxford, Often colleges have travel grants or research grants for students. Or, of course, there are the societies, like the Royal Society or the Royal Geological Society. Those types of societies might also have grants and things for students. So it's a bit like when you're actually a PI, that's a principal investigator, and you have to apply for grants for all sorts of things. Moving into the world of the postgraduate student is like a kind of a dress rehearsal for that. You have to constantly be on the lookout for things you can apply for, extra bits of funding. It's good practice. And so how do you meet all these various costs? Well, I have started to touch on that. But I think there are 4 or 5 principal places you can go to get funding to do these types of degrees. So number 1, obviously, UKRI, UK Research and Innovation. They're the primary funders in the UK of training postgraduate students. They award funding to universities, to places like the Doctoral Training Centre, who deliver training programmes specifically to support cohorts of students like you. To obtain this funding, you don't apply to UKRI, you apply direct to the institutions, to those individual programmes of study. So in my case, that would be the ILESLA programme. You apply to ILESLA, and by doing so, you are also considered for this funding. And these types of programmes are hosted in universities all across the UK. So really finding them can be a question of looking at the individual university websites that you're interested in, or in this case, going to the UKRI website, where if you go into the relevant research council, you can find a list of all the different funded programmes, and that can be quite a good place to start, because you can literally click on those one after the other and go through to the universities that way. These programmes will typically pay your course fees, your stipend, which I think next year is 20,805, and that's tax-free, and then they'll pay, a certain amount, depending on the research council. It could be £11,000 for your research costs, or it could be £20,000. So it's worth investigating to see the different models available. The second main one, bursaries and scholarships. So they may cover all of your fees or part of them. There are lots and lots of different models, and these are one of the more confusing types of funding, because they don't tend to be pulled together all into one place. But I've got a few links up here for sources where you can go to try and find funding for master's and doctoral degrees. Lots of institutions and organisations, such as some of the ones we partner, Diamond, Lightsource, Pirbright, will fund scholarships quite separately from our programme. So they partner our programme, but they also do their own thing. There are also BGS, British Geological Society, CEH, which is the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and lots of other research organisations will fund PhD opportunities. I think, again, on the UKRI website, you can actually do a search for independent research organisations and get a full list of them. So you could, click on those one by one, go through to their websites and see what they have available. There are also charitable trusts like the Rhodes House, and they actually, interestingly, will cover additional things like international flights and the healthcare charge as part of those scholarships. Lots of people have a look at the findaphd.com website. Does what it says on the tin. They're not all advertised there, but a huge amount of PhDs, funded PhDs, are advertised there. And then there are international scholarships. Individual governments around the world will have their own scholarships that they might offer. We've got the Commonwealth scholarships in the UK, and the United Nations, in fact the IPCC have co-funded some of our studentships, and UNESCO. So there are lots of different possible sources that you can go to, so it's worth spending a bit of time investigating that. This is one that we're really trying to crack into at the moment, employer funding. There are various different models for this. At Oxford University, for example, if you're a staff member, you can get help towards the cost of university fees. I think it's something like 50%, which is no small thing, especially if you're international. A lot of employers will sponsor employees to do PhDs, especially if it's directly relevant to the work that they're already doing. It's a great way of doing professional development for your employees. I think the Army is quite big on this, so I hear. There's industrial sponsorship. So I've got two models of that, student-led and supervisor-led. What that really means is some students are really active in going and seeking out this type of collaborative funding from industry partners. And we've had a lot of success on the NERC DTP with students going and approaching industry partners or NGOs, even charities. Places like Save the Elephants have come in and co-funded studentships. Sometimes it's the supervisor who has contacts in industry. For example, in earth sciences, a lot of the supervisors have contacts in the mining industry, and of course they've got tons of money. So that can be a really great way of getting industrial sponsorship for your PhD. And then grants and supervisor project link. So some supervisors will have their own research grants that have studentships embedded as part of them. And therefore supervisors can then advertise their own project, they've got their own funding. So those will mostly be advertised on departmental pages. So you'll need to go to the institution, to the relevant department, and they will have usually a project page somewhere where there are funded opportunities available. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up that whole page. Part of being a PI is constantly looking for opportunities. So that's what supervisors will often do. They're just constantly applying for funding. And you can really contact people directly, actually, even if you have no idea whether or not there's anything available. Sometimes you can do that by going through one of their students. That can be quite a good way to get in touch with the supervisor as well. And finally, and this is my kind of least favourite option, everybody's least favourite option, you can get student loans in order to do a PhD. But I think going through a government route is the best way to do it rather than an independent route. The UK government scheme only requires that you pay it back once your income reaches a certain threshold, and that's agreed, well, they say that's agreed in advance as part of your repayment plan, but I think recently they've sort of moved the goalposts a bit on that, so I wouldn't be so sure about that now. But here are various links that you might find useful to investigate if that was a route you wanted to go down, but I would really leave that till last. And finally, I just wanted to draw your attention to the Daphne Jackson Trust. These do not provide funding, but they do offer fellowships to help those interested in getting back into active research, and they provide a lot of support in obtaining these kind of opportunities. They're a bit like extended internships or placements, I guess. So you really get back in to the world of research. You get a lot of practice of skills. You gain a lot of skills. You get a lot of training, and you also get a lot of support with putting applications together, getting your CV sorted out, and getting networks built up, so that you're almost in research by the time you make your application to do a PhD. They usually take place in UK universities, in research institutions or in industry, and they include a lot of mentorship as well. And so finally, there's just a few general points to consider. Postgraduate students in the UK are not generally liable to pay tax. So the stipend that I mentioned earlier is tax-free. But the downside is that you also don't have national insurance, pension contributions, so you'll have to make those up a bit later. Also, if you're a student in the US, the IRS will come after you. So you're not tax exempt in the US, even though your stipend is paid in the UK. Working, Gail's already touched on this about it's not recommended to work more than 6 hours a week. If you're doing a full-time PhD, it's just really not sustainable and you don't want to burn out. And visas, again, may restrict your working hours. In terms of getting scholarships or funding from institutions, normally they're only made in year one of your training. It's generally very difficult to get funding from a university once you get into your second year. So you have to kind of really focus on that, getting that funding in your first year if you want to maximise the opportunities. And also, even though you're only expected to provide evidence that you can fund your first year, you are still going to have to fund the rest of it. So don't just focus on the first year. You need to know that you can definitely support yourself for the full 4 years. So there's just the major considerations that I would say when it comes to how much it might cost and where you might find that funding.